So let's talk a little bit about how HR's roles have changed over time. In the past, and when I'm talking about the past, I'm talking about 30, 40 years ago, that there was very little strategic thinking on the part of HR management. In fact, most people in the field of HR came through psychology, which really didn't address corporate strategy, business strategy, etc. They understood measurement, they understood how to assess people, and how to do some basic policy writing, but they really didn't get into the strategic side of things. They were more operational and advocacy and administrative in the approach that they took to things. Nowadays, now and into the future, probably 60% of their job is focused on strategy. Having that strategic seat at the table, they're involved in the forecasting and the planning and the consideration of the human capital, whether or not it actually is going to meet the needs of the company, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a great thing. Then the operational advocacy and the administrative stuff. So who picks up the slack? Well, in fact, because HR has moved more towards this strategic focus, the people picking up the slack are managers, mid-level managers, supervisors, et cetera, et cetera. And your job is to help with forecasting. Your job is to help identify what you need in a job candidate with respect to recruiting. Now, HR does most of the stuff in recruiting, as we'll learn in a few lessons. But you have to let them know what it is you specifically need. So those minimum requirements are really important and need to come from you. So they then create the recruiting messages and the work that they do there. HR handles providing you with access to selection assessment tools and will recommend the ones to use, but they need to train you on how to administer them. They need to train you on how to write and interview properly. You will be doing the performance appraisals. You are the one seeing the employees work every day. You need to be the one assessing the employees. The HR department creates the policy and they train you on how to do the policy and then you implement. So you can see where this is going, right? We all play really important roles in the process. Every tool in the toolbox needs to be used to get the most out of our employees, to treat them fairly, and to do the work the proper way. So the biggest challenges seen in the field of HR right now are things like globalization of businesses. How do we do global HR? And it is very different. The way that we pay people, the way that we manage people, the way that we hire and fire people is very different in a global context. We cannot move forward into a country with U.S. policies because our policies are incredibly different than those of organizations, across the globe. So as we become more global in our approach to things, HR's focus needs to be more global as well. And there are certifications out there for those that are interested in doing global HR and SPHR certification. The HRCI offers a global professional and human resource management certification for those that are interested in that. Then, of course, there are the economic and technological changes, and the biggest technological changes right now are things like artificial intelligence and the role that AI plays in hiring and in many, many business decisions. So we'll talk a little bit about that in this course. Economic changes, of course, they go up, they go down, they go in, they go out. Everything changes, in the wind, depending on, world events. We can't exist in an isolated bubble. Because of the globalized nature of economies, what goes on in the Ukraine affects us here in the United States. What goes on in the Middle East affects us here in the United States and vice versa. So things that happen here affect the World Bank, they affect the world financial markets. So it's an interplay back and forth. So all economic issues, we need to stay on top of them. And some things are in our control, and some things are not. And some things are in the control of our president or our Congress, and some of them are not. Some of them are in the control of what's going on in other economies. And unfortunately, the spillover effect is no matter what we do, we're going to be affected by this stuff. Other things, workforce demographics and diversity. Now, DEI, quote unquote, is is really struggling with a lot of backlash. And I would argue that the struggle comes from the notion that we need to do this is what it means to be black, this is what it means to be gay, this is what it means to be transgender, this is what it means to be Latino, this is what it means to be disabled, kind of lessons in training and development and diversity and DEI work. Really, the sweet spot in DEI work is in inclusion and belonging. And how do we create an environment and a culture where people feel like they are welcomed and accepted as need be? So there are all sorts of lovely things out there. We will have a session on diversity management and things like that in a little bit in this course. But really, we want to make sure that we are on top of trends and that we are creating environments where everyone feels like their voice matters, and that their opinion matters and their work matters, regardless of anything else. Lastly is obviously organizational costs and pressures and restructuring. We buy things out, we buy out, we have mergers and acquisitions. We're trying to decrease costs, but I caution you all again, and I've said this earlier, you have to spend money to make money. You have to invest in human capital to give them the skills to do the job well. So it's a upfront cost for a long-term benefit. And that is a mindset that a lot of organizations struggle with. So when we talk about people being assets, they are not in an accounting sense assets, but they are in terms of when we invest in them, we get a yield back of higher productivity and better performance overall. So as we think about current HR challenges, obviously we know things are changing. The world rapidly changes. It just takes, very little to see how a pandemic can step up and change the world within days, right, or months. It takes not much to have an economic impact if we have an organization that fails, like a GM situation back in 2008. So we can recognize that things can change on a dime, and our job as HR professionals is to adapt accordingly. If we don't adapt, we're going to run into major problems. So, as I said here, there are 3 guarantees in life. And the first one, of course, is that we're all going to die. The second one is, of course, we're all going to pay taxes. It really doesn't matter who's in office. You're all going to pay taxes. The last one is the one I add. Like the first 2 are attributed to Benjamin Franklin. The last one is something that I've added. Things will change. Always. Things will always change. You might say, well, we need to conserve and we need to keep things safe and predictable, and you can't do that in a global economy. And we also know isolationism doesn't work. So things are always going to change. You change every day as you grow, as you learn, as you move to a different job, as you get older. We all learn new things. I learn new things. Organizations have to learn new things, and we have to be willing to adapt. Things are not going to stay stable. Things will always change. So knowing this, it is important for us to learn how to be more adaptable so that we can change as the environment changes around us. So what specifically has changed in the workplace? And there's probably, 7 categories here of major themes of things that have changed over the last couple of decades that really shifts the way we have to think about work. And perhaps it's not as relevant for all of you or many of you who have only been working in the last 10 or 15 years. But for those of us that have been working for 40 or more years, these are some changes that we've seen. And so I'm going to talk about things that were changes that happened in my lifetime, but also for us to be thinking about going forward. If these things have changed in my lifetime, what can we expect moving forward in your lifetime, right? So the categories are paternalism, this emphasis on technology and intellectual property. Included in that are things like artificial intelligence and stuff, which we'll say in a moment. Globalization, employee skills, safety and security, the changing nature of work itself, and what it means to be working in an intergenerational workforce. So we'll cover each one of these items as we go through. So let's start with the next slide on paternalism.